Good morning and welcome to How to Waste Money in Your Divorce. I am here with my wonderful colleagues from the Vesta Irvine Hub, and we are thankful that you are here joining us today. And we're going to go ahead and get started. But before we get started, I'm going to have Elizabeth go ahead and read our legal disclaimer.
Thank you. Please understand that the legal information given in this program is to be considered educational, informational, and general in nature only, and does not substitute for legal advice. Our legal team, Elizabeth and Patricia, are only licensed to practice law in California, and therefore any information provided shall only relate to the laws of the state of California. Thank you.
So, what is one way that we can waste some money? What we have is a failure to communicate. When you're talking to your attorney or your mediator, please understand that every minute you spend talking to them is money that you're billed. So communicate clearly with your attorney.
Rather than sending me 10 emails with one question each, oh yeah, I forgot about this, and what about this? Think about it ahead of time, send me a list of 10 questions, and then I can just go in and answer all 10 at once.
Make sure you have an agenda for mediation sessions, for meetings with your attorney, or any collaborative team meetings. Now is not the time to wing it. We're going to have Cheryl, our therapist, talk about why your attorney's not your therapist and why you shouldn't call them over non-legal issues.
Exactly. You want to have clarity and you want to reduce your anxiety. Attorneys are not educated in being therapists, and you want to go through all of that emotion, get rid of all that anxiety before you sit down, because your attorney, again, is not educated to handle your emotions, and it costs you a lot of money. So going to a therapist is super important in the beginning of your divorce process.
Asked but not answered. Your intake form. If your attorney or your mediator sends you intake forms, there's a reason they're asking you for information. Please complete them thoroughly.
If you see things on a form that don't apply to you, don't hesitate to put not applicable. That way your attorney knows that you've considered it, not that you just blew through it and didn't finish it. When your attorney needs to contact you for missing information to chase you for it, you have to pay for that contact, whether it be from your attorney or their paralegal.
And if your attorney tells you need to respond to something in your case, please work with them to provide them with as much information as possible.
It's less expensive for you to get your documents together than for your attorney to reach out to try to get those attorneys from other sources. We have clients that say, I can't get them from my bank. It's too complicated. Well, you have a login for your bank. You can download them and you can email them to me, whereas I may have to issue a subpoena or some kind of other authorization that will cost you both my time and the copy cost.
Oh, and make sure you're responding solely to facts in your case. If you have emotional challenges, this is the time to talk to your therapist. Cheryl?
Very normal when you're going through any type of grief process to have your brain just spinning around. The best thing to do to organize yourself and be ready for the rest of your professionals and stay focused is journal every concern you have: financial, real estate, mortgage, what you're going to do to tell the children, the things that you want to accomplish with visitation when you sit down with your attorneys. Write them down and be prepared.
Preliminary disclosures are required. They're required in mediation, collaborative divorce, litigated matters. Your divorce cannot be final unless these preliminary disclosures are exchanged.
The disclosures contain information with respect to the things that you own and the things that you owe on, and only you know what those are. And you need to provide supporting documentation to the other side because you may be the only one that has access to them or the passwords for them. If bank accounts and credit cards are in your name only, you must disclose them. If the credit cards are in both of your names, you must disclose them. If you have any community property, your cars, your retirement, your money market account, your 401k, you must disclose it. If you have separate property that someone gave you and that you don't actively participate in, you still must disclose it. Now I'm going to send it over to Susan and Tommy, who are going to
Big Glenn and Greg, right?
my apologies.
Okay, I'll hop in. Hi, a CDFA, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, or otherwise a divorce financial expert. Went through divorce myself after 24 years of marriage. Wish I would have had someone like me when I did so. Attorneys are not trained to value assets properly, and moreover, tell you the impact of if you divide assets in a given way on your life. They can advise you legally what you're entitled to, but they don't understand the tax implications, the risk, the ability to generate income, the ability for liquidity, or answer the question that all the participants ask me that I work for is, am I going to be okay? How do I make sense of this? So attorneys are not trained in marital asset division, really from the aspect of helping you understand what it means to you. You're dissolving the marital enterprise. You're dissolving the family business. And as such, if you were a business partner with someone in any given area or industry, you would want to know the value of everything that you're negotiating. And you would want to know the risk that the risk or the debt that might be incurred as well. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is leaving money on the table, miscalculation of assets, because all assets aren't necessarily worth what the number is on a sheet of paper, for instance, a pension. So don't fall into the trap of not being fully prepared. You only get one chance to do this right. Marital asset division is essentially final.
Okay, and next we're going to talk about what my partner and I call the Jurassic Park rule. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So discovery in a family law case is a way to get additional information, either by asking questions, requesting documents, or sitting down for a deposition, which is a conversation under oath. So you're going to want to think about, what do you actually need in your case? All of these things cost money.
Do you really need to subpoena every bank, every credit card? Do you need to send out a bunch of notices, preserving electronic discovery, notices on fiduciary duties? And do you absolutely have to take your spouse's deposition? What you want to make sure is that you're going to get the most return on your investment. And Susan and Tommy, speaking of investments, are going to talk about ways that you can save money pertaining to your home.
But the biggest mistake that I commonly see clients make is that, you think you can afford to keep the property. And so you go into the marriage into the divorce, and one person's going to keep the property. Then they get into the separation, and the most costly thing you can do is find out after you complete your divorce that now you can't keep that house, you can't afford it. And now all of a sudden the divorce is finalized and you just lost half of the capital gains exemption. And so that is the absolute most costly mistake that I see people make.
On my end, one of the things that I see is people will go and spend $600 to $800 on an appraisal when they could have gotten a market analysis from me at no cost. Problem with that too is that the appraisal
gives a value as of that very date based on things that happened 6 to 12 months ago. And my market analysis is based on what the value is today. And I can give you an idea of what the forecast is for the next 6 to 12 months. Better way to spend that money would be to order possibly a home inspection. If the home is in some disrepair, there's usually a lot of deferred maintenance. So there's nothing like, fighting to get that property and to keep buy the spouse out and then find out that there's some major issues with electric or plumbing or possibly even, mold or something or new roof. And those items can be tens of thousands of dollars.
Don't sweat the small stuff. You really want to think about what you're paying for. Don't use your attorney or your mediation sessions to discuss dishes, bedding, furniture, things like that. The money spent on these arguments is often much more than the value of the items themselves.
Similarly, does it matter who bought the clothes for your children? Having arguments in front of the attorneys or mediators, or arguing about whether or not you need to bring the items back and forth on each exchange is it actually costs more than purchasing new clothes as it would cost you.
And so these are times your money's better spent with a divorce coach or therapist. Cheryl?
Yes, you really want to work with a therapist during this time to watch your language, use I messages, not you messages, not be accusatory, because obviously that's going to ramp up the conflict with your soon to be ex. So that's really an important thing to go over. And the most important thing is to watch how you communicate to your children about your divorce. It's so crucial because you don't want to put any guilt on them. You don't want them to think it's their fault. So it's really important to sit down with the therapist to discuss what is an age-appropriate way to approach divorce in general. It can make a huge difference. Your kids can walk away thinking, I can do something different to have my parents not get divorced, versus this is not my fault. This isn't my problem. And my parents will still love me and they're not going to divorce me. They're just moving away from each other.
Sorry about that. I wasn't on mute, but what we want to make sure is that you're not paying for an appraisal without needing a loan. And so many times when you enter into the process, you end up either wanting to refinance, whether that's a cash out, or you just need to pull the other party off of that loan. So you're actually going to end up doing an appraisal through the process anyhow. And so instead of getting an appraisal up front, spending that money, wait until if you are going to refinance or do a cash out, use that appraisal to save you a little bit of money.
Susan, you're muted.
The market analysis that I provide is one that's a lot more current. Also, I specialize in these areas. And so I'm able to give you not just current information, but information that's very specific to your neighborhood.
Yeah. And, make sure if you're going to do a cash out refinance prior to entering into the divorce process, that your spouse is going to be willing to sign off on this process. And so, here in California, it's necessary that, even if your spouse isn't on the loan, they still are going to sign an interspousal grant deed that basically acknowledges that this process is okay and that they're on board with it. And so many times I've had clients that have gotten all the way to the finish line only to find out that their spouse won't sign that deed. And we just wasted all that time and money in the process. And then if you're going to want to keep the home, we kind of touched on this earlier, but, make sure you can qualify and afford to keep that property. And so you don't want to spend, all this time arguing with, in the courts, only to find out that you can't even qualify for that home on your own.
And now we're going to hear from our financials, and they're going to tell you not to be penny wise and pound foolish.
Greg, come on in.
All right. So one thing that people don't realize when you're going through the marital asset division process is not everything is easy to divide. You can't just chop everything in half and call it a day. One of those things are employer-sponsored retirement plans. Okay. And so there's a special legal document that's necessary to divide these types of accounts. And it costs money to do that. And not only does it cost money, but these documents cost a considerable amount of time to process by these administrators. And so the name of those documents are Qualified Domestic Relations Orders, QDROs. Okay. And so it can take 6 months easily to process a QDRO. And as you can imagine, something like a 401k is a market-based account, and those values are fluctuating every day, every second, every minute, right? And so if you've decided somebody's going to get $50,000 out of a 401k, that might not be accurate 6 months from now based on market fluctuations. So you want to think about you want to be particular with your verbiage is what I'm trying to say. And so you don't want to just go get a boilerplate QDRO off the internet and say, oh yeah, I can totally write this up myself. The other thing is failing to understand the characteristics of the assets and the debts that are within your community. Okay, so that's things like tax implications, risk, liquidity, ability to generate income. All of these things play a role in how your post-divorce life will be affected by your asset division. Okay, and if you don't understand those things, you need somebody to help you understand those things. And not only do you need somebody that understands those things, but you need to understand how they'll affect really you, because you're in a special situation going through divorce, because you're taking the resources that are supporting one household and you're splitting them up, and now you're supporting 2 households. Okay. And so, as I mentioned before, QDROs are a legal document that costs money. So one thing that a CDFA will help you with is drawing up scenarios that equalize each other's retirement assets to reduce the number of QDROs that you need. Okay. And so don't make the mistake of thinking that you've got the most simple asset division scenario out there. It's pretty common that people say to themselves, hey, we've got a really simple case, wham, bam, and we're done. And you don't want to do that because you might end up spending thousands of dollars on these legal documents. And so really, at the end of the day, marital asset division is a business transaction. And we've heard several times, please speak with your therapist so that you're not bringing your emotions into these decisions. It's only going to make things more difficult, more costly, less efficient.
If I could, thank you, Greg, hop in too here. There are 4 major pillars of divorce. There's the legal, the financial, the emotional, and real estate. And I believe none of them can be ignored. They're all interrelated. Divorce it's a business, and the business of divorce doesn't care about emotion. No one really wins. What the state is looking for is the days are gone where one party takes the other party to the cleaners. The state is looking for an equitable resolution. So what a CDFA does is people like Greg and myself, we provide clarity, comfort, and confidence to understand all the aspects of marital asset division and negotiate an equitable resolution that you understand how it will impact your life and your post-divorce life. While you're married, you're a 50% partner in the marital corporation, whether you were the wage earner or the CEO of the home. The last thing I would say here is that we see sometimes people being penny wise, pound foolish. No one wants to pay for legal fees or advisory fees. I employ what I call net decision making, which is net of fees, net of costs, net of expenses. Are you better off using that service? And if you are, then that service has provided the value that it professes.
So you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. The court does not care who's right or wrong. So it's important not to become fixed on a position for custody or a percentage of time. You really need to be flexible on your schedule and a parenting plan. And those best parenting plans are really the ones that parties work out to achieve rather than ones that a court sets out. Cheryl?
I remember a book that was written that was called You Could Be Right or You Could Be Married. Well, I'm going to change it to You Can Be Right or You Can Finally Get Divorced. And so you really don't want to dig your heels in. And this is where, you know, I can sit down with you as a therapist to really discuss what you want and how to look at how you can evidence it by, like, as an example, you know, you do really well with homework and your soon-to-be ex doesn't like doing homework with your child. That's where you can start planning when you sit down with your attorney to say, this is why I want to ask the court to have this child at this time so I can do the homework. And sometimes that makes complete sense. But we want you to learn how to let go of the things that don't matter and really hold on and be passionate about the things that do matter. But as a therapist, I'm here to tell you, it's really good for you to start substantiating it. I know that's a legal term, but it really, really works emotionally too, to say, I'm just not demanding this, but emotionally, I'm asking this because this benefits my child. Or in some cases, this benefits both myself and my soon-to-be ex. So definitely, again, talk to a divorce coach or a divorce therapist like myself or anyone in Vesta. And we can really help you sort all of these emotions out and, again, get you really focused when you sit down with the other professionals.
We also want you to remember that you'll need to have some flexibility, you know, for family events like weddings or visiting a sick grandparent. Those don't always fall on your weekend. Your children aren't divorcing and they shouldn't be deprived of family time or these extra visits just because it doesn't fit into the schedule. So don't make your lawyer go to court and argue about why your spouse shouldn't be able to take your child on the trip so that your child can be the flower girl or the ring bearer. You know, it's remember that you will at some point need that flexibility too. So please be generous with it to start.
Elizabeth, I did want to comment too. I spend a lot of time as a therapist sorting that out with the family so that they can really sit down with you and be prepared for structuring their lives around it. And I personally can say I've gone through this where if I know that it's, you know, that weekend you don't have the kids, you go and plan things as an individual with, say, a new relationship, and you learn to just go with it and what the court said. And I've always felt that when they get a court order that says this is your visitation schedule, it brings structure, and structure reduces the possibility of more conflict. So definitely we do talk about that, and it makes the legal aspect a lot easier when people know they've got to adhere to that court order.
And just like you said, Cheryl, the question is, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? You know, once your divorce is signed by the court, it's extremely difficult to make those changes. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn and Greg, and they're going to talk about some more of those financial mistakes.
All right, I'll go first this time, Greg. All right, so as I mentioned before, divorce is it's a business, and it doesn't care about emotion. So I'd like to implore you to know that this is a temporary circumstance. It's not without some pain. But the sooner that you take stock of the lot that you're in and be educated and informed and make decisions based on that, the better off you'll be and the greater chance you have of having a better outcome at the end of this. We often hear that I had a client the other day that we're already working with as a CDFA, and he was ready to move forward on the process of filing. And he suggested an attorney that he had talked to and said, she's a bulldog. I really need a bulldog. And I would submit that's not the right way to think about this. Because when you get bulldogs both puffing out their chests, they're racking up money. They're billing hours all the time. You do want someone who's a strong advocate for you, who can defend you. But at the same time, you want them to be mindful of coming to a resolution, to coming to an agreement. All we're doing is negotiating a marital settlement agreement. We're dissolving the family enterprise of which you are a 50% partner in. And the other mistake that I see people make before I turn over to Greg is not understanding the financial impact of dividing the assets along a given way. So part of our secret sauce is lining up things in a way that they're easily understood, being able to explain different assets so they're easily understood, which lawyers do not do. They write letters back and forth and interrogatories and requests for respondents and so forth. Hard to extrapolate the data out of there, what it means to you. So we line it up plainly, and then we go about the business of asking, what do you want? And we move things from one side of the ledger to the other so that we have an equitable division. Further, we do what we call an income analysis that's going to show you if you divide the assets along scenario A, B, or C, this is how you make sense out of your new financial normal. I want you to give yourself some credit for being here. And I want to also, again, as I said, urge you to know this is a temporary circumstance in your life. It's going to be painful. It's not going to be without some, some challenge. In fact, there are some things you have to do when you go through divorce. You have to make some decisions. You have to meet some deadlines. You have to disclose some things. But guess what else? You get to do some things. You got a whiteboard, a white sheet. You can do things that you subordinated for your family. And I've found people that have rediscovered incredible things that they can do. And I believe the same can happen for you. Greg?
Thanks, Glenn. And that's exactly right. You get to do some things. You get to envision what you want your life to look like moving forward. And really, marital asset division is going to facilitate that. The decisions that you make throughout the process are meant to facilitate that. You don't have to chop everything down the middle just because we're a community property state, right? You can equalize certain things, right? That you can equalize. If somebody wants to keep the house, you can equalize that maybe with retirement accounts, right? But at the same time, it's not super simple because, again, you don't want to be house rich and cash poor because you can't lop off the corner of your house, go down to the grocery store and buy some groceries. It doesn't work that way, right? And so there is some design that and some massaging that needs to be done sometimes, but you also want to understand, what you can do, what's possible with the community pot. And so you need to know what's in the community pot in order to be able to negotiate that. And so you need to understand what you're entitled to. Okay. What is community property? What is separate property? And if you think you've got separate property or you think they've got separate property, you need to be able to understand how to substantiate that, where to draw those lines, how that works, right? If somebody's brought a house into the marriage, but then you've used community property funding to pay down the mortgage. Now, all of a sudden, that gets a little bit complicated, right? Same could be said for a retirement account. If you started working as a teacher prior to being married, and then you continued to work while you were married, you paid into your pension with some separate property, and you paid into your pension with some community property. That becomes somewhat complex, right? And so, it's not just a black and white situation there. And attorneys are attorneys. They're not number people necessarily. A lot of attorneys are going to tell you that they hate numbers. Okay, so they don't want to do this work. They're not efficient or trained at doing this work. And so work with somebody like a CDFA who has put the time in, has the passion for doing this sort of thing, right? It's going to be more efficient, not only because, maybe their hourly rate is less, but also because they're more efficient and they want to do it with you. Okay. And so the last thing that we're going to say is understand your price of peace. It's not just the price of peace. It's really your price of peace, right? So if you could just be done and on to the next chapter of your life today, what is that worth to you? Right? Because, we've mentioned it before. You can spend a lot of money fighting over certain things that maybe aren't worth it. You'd spend $10 to solve a $5 problem pretty easily in divorce. And so some things, while we don't want you to accept anything less than what you're entitled to, sometimes you can sacrifice things and there can be a tremendous value there because you get then to move on, right? You get to spend less emotional capital. You get to spend less really just financial capital as well, fighting over it. And so with that.
Great. This is Cheryl. I definitely want to state one thing about emotion. And in general, as people are going through a divorce, so many people go running to the bar, grabbing that cocktail with a friend, listening to all of their friends talk about their divorce. And I strongly recommend that you don't run out there and say to your lawyer, well, my friend got this, in court and, got half of the house and this and that. Don't have the mindset that you're going to get what your friends are going to get. Everybody's divorce is incredibly unique on all fronts of all of these areas of expertise. Don't run high on emotion. Don't get into high conflict and I'm, going to get my vengeance. Keep in a positive mode and you will have a new chapter to your life once you get through this. But work with all of the professionals, reducing your stress and your anxiety. And again, stay focused and don't compare your divorce with anyone else's.
And thank you for being with us today. We are the Irvine Vesta Hub. I'd like all my colleagues to unmute so that you can see all of us. Thank you for joining us today. We will have ways that you can get into contact with us in the comments, and we hope that you'll join us for one of our live webinars.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
We needed coffee in the beginning.